we measure bug quality for the guys that write bugs, and bug quality is basically out of 100 bugs, how many real bugs did I find? Right? So if I submit 100 bugs, but only 90 bugs actually result in a code change or are a real issue, then my bug quality in percent is about 90%. Yeah. And so what does this mean? I mean, this is just a number. You may say, okay, just yet another metric. Actually, what this means is there's two things that you can look at. One is how much time do you waste of your own time to write a bug, which then turns out is not a bug because you just didn't have time to read the requirements properly, or you didn't have time to set up the test data how you were supposed to. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, of course, the developer that gets this bug assigned to him then also looks at it and and has to try to reproduce, and maybe spends 20 minutes on trying to reproducing it, and then just finds out that, hey, it's actually not a bug, right? So you waste your own time, but you also waste somebody else's time. So, and the higher this bug quality percentage is, the less time you waste of your own time and also of the developer's time. And again, what you see is when we started our test automation efforts, we were somewhere at about 80% bug quality, which is, can be good, can be bad. I talked to somebody yesterday who said sometimes they have 50% bug quality. So, 80% in that, with that respect, is great. Others may have different numbers. That's not the point. The point is that as we continue to invest into, as we started and continue to invest into test automation, we had this nice effect that because all of a sudden we had more time to really spend, testing, to actually test, our bugs got a lot better. And and as you can see, it went up to almost 95. Then we had a little bit in 2010. Still not quite sure what happened there, but at the end of 2010, we operated at almost 100%. So basically, everything we found was a bug and was something that needed to be fixed through a code change. All right, so this overlay is actually has nothing to do with bug quality or anything. Not sure if anybody knows what that is. This is the eBay stock price over the same period of time. So again, not sure if we were the driver for the stock price or the other way around. I'm still trying to figure that out. I just saw this a while ago and I thought, okay, well, that I've seen that kind of chart before. So I overlaid the two, and it's actually, yeah, it fits quite nicely. Good. So let's look a little bit about technical recipes and best practices. I already mentioned at eBay Europe we have about 3,500 end-to-end regression test cases, and each one of them takes about 2 to 3 minutes of execution time. So you fire up your browser, you do your stuff, and then you close your browser again. So in a sequential execution, if you didn't have, if you didn't have any parallelism there, then in a sequential execution world, that would result in best case 7,000 minutes, which translates into 5 days. So if you ran these tests sequentially, it would still, in an automated way, it would still take you 5 days to get them through the system, right? So absolutely impossible, especially if you live in a more agile world. 5 days of one test run is not exactly what you want. And this is exactly where grid comes into place. So I already mentioned that. So Selenium 1 had a grid, and now WebDriver also has a grid, which allows you to run tests in parallel. And in just a sec, there we go. So today we have about 150 VMs or browsers, so we're still trying to fine-tune this, but basically we have 150 browsers running in this grid, And we pumped the 3,500 tests in there, and our execution time came down to 60 minutes. So that is huge, right? If you look at it, 5 days to 60 minutes, that is an enabler for agile development, for example. Or that also, that gives you that instant feedback that we were looking for. 5 days is not exactly instant feedback. So if we look at before or after, whether this is a sprint or whether it's waterfall, it doesn't really matter, right? We basically had this thing where the developers developed, and then at the end, you test, and we all know what that means generally for software quality. So today we're here where we can develop, we can test, we can develop, we can test, and we have that instant feedback from our automation runs, where developers also, of course, know at any time how good it is what they wrote. Yeah, so they get this instant feedback about what they did. Good. So now we talked about what we did. Now let's look a little bit at the limits of automation. I say very clearly, not everything can and needs to be automated. I think the worst thing you can do is actually try to automate everything. I've talked to people who said, "Oh, we're going to try to automate exploratory testing, for example." Well, I think that's not the smartest idea. So don't, automate where it makes sense, which I believe is mainly the regression piece, and leave it at that. Look at test coverage versus the maintenance effort, right? Maybe in some cases, in order to increase your test coverage by a few percentage points, you have to double the number of tests that you actually have. And that generally ends up in a maintenance nightmare, right? So at some point, just say, okay, we've hit the point where maintenance is slowly becoming an issue. So don't go past that point. Do refactoring or go through your tests and sort them out, whatever you need to do, but don't just keep adding to it. And then we have low testability, and I'll show a little example about low testability in a minute. And this following example is going to be a very nice example how testing and development should work together in order to avoid exactly situations like this. So what we have here is a plain old regular HTML checkbox, right? So if you go onto eBay, you think that, well, it's going to look somewhat like this. Now, what it looks like on eBay is this, right? It looks like a checkbox, but when you actually look at the HTML, it's well, you may not exactly know right away that you're looking at a checkbox just by looking at the HTML. So what does this mean for testability? It means that it is probably also not super easy to test this checkbox, and I've seen it. My engineers, they've really struggled trying to automate stuff like this. Where things look like a regular HTML element, and it's just a complete pain in the neck to try to tick that thing from a tool like Selenium or WebDriver. I think this can be easily avoided if, from the very beginning, the developers and the testers actually work together, and the testers understand what this means, right? And they say, hey, is there another way to solve this? Also, one thing that what we run into all the time are things like missing IDs on pages. But, you don't have to assign an ID to an element on a page, but it will still work. But when you're trying to automate it, it also works at first, but then something changes on the page, and all of a sudden the ID of that element changes, and all of a sudden all your test cases are completely shot, right? So that can be super easily avoided if from the very beginning, the developer assigns an ID to an element. So again, very, this is kind of an ask to the developers. Basically, when you write your code, also think about how it can be tested from an automation perspective. Okay, so we're slowly coming to an end. What has changed? I think a lot of people have probably already seen that, but I just want to summarize it. What has changed for us is we were able to reduce our manual regression testing effort by 90%. And which means that we were able to reinvest that time. So this is not about, saving resources or trying to lay people off. It's basically a redeployment of the time from manual regression testing into types of testing where you can actually yield a lot more issues, a lot more bugs. About 3,500 automated tests running continuously in our system today. The execution time 1 hour, down from a minimum of 5 hours, or actually, if you 5 days, or if you actually try to run those 3,500 tests completely manually, you wouldn't even fit it into a release cycle of 2 weeks, right? So today we're down to 1 hour. We still test manually as well. Very important. Even regression testing, we those 10% or whatever, whatever is left that's not automated, we still do manual checks because, yes, we do trust the machines and we do trust our automation scripts, but I think it's always a wise idea to have 1 or 2 or 3 pairs of eyes looking at the product, and just to make sure that everything works. But you don't have to go through every single flow that's out there. And also what has changed is we like our job. I'm not saying that we didn't like our job before, but I think the job satisfaction today within the team is much, much higher than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And that is because the manual testers, they can now really focus their energy on the manual testing, and the guys who like to code, they can now go and code, right? And the guys in between who like to do a little bit of manual testing and who like to do a little bit of automation, they also get their fun. So from a job perspective, I think this is a very, very big change compared to what we had a bunch of years ago.